Hi, this is Anna of Mochi Mochi Land, and I'm here today with a tutorial showing wrap and turn short rows. It's an intermediate to advanced technique that helps you get nice bends and curves in your knitting. I use them here on the belly of this bluebird of crappiness to point the head and face up away from the tail. I use them at the back of the neck of this T-Rex, Tina the tiny T-Rex, to make her face point forward from the rest of her body. So this is a technique where you are making what's called short rows. Literally, you're stopping short in a row or a round, and then you're doing some back and forth stockinette knitting to add rows to one portion of your row or round, and that changes the direction of your stitches. It's actually pretty basic once you understand how it works. I'm going to show it flat first, and then I'll show it in the round, but it's the same technique. And there's a knit stitch to it and a purl stitch to it. So here's my flat piece. I cast on 10 stitches and knit a few rows of stockinette stitch. And I'm going to knit 8 of the 10 stitches here. So that I have 2 stitches left on the left needle. So instead of finishing the row, I'm stopping short. To do a short row, I'm going to wrap and turn this next stitch. I'm going to bring my working yarn from the back between the 2 needles to the front, and I will slip the next stitch purlwise onto my right needle. Then take that working yarn between the needles again from front to back so that the stitch is wrapped. You see that little bump there? And then slip the stitch back onto the left needle. So it's wrapped there. And now the turn of the wrap and turn, just flip it around like you would at the end of a row. And now I'm going to purl back this direction. Usually wrap and turn rows are symmetrical, so I'm going to purl back until I have that same number 2 stitches on the left needle. So now I'm purling 6. So here I've got 2. Now I'm going to wrap and turn this next stitch. Because I've been purling, my working yarn is in the front. I'm going to take that again between the needles and go from front to back. Then slip the next stitch purlwise and take the working yarn from back to front again and slip it back. So it's just like the knit side, except the working yarn is going in the other direction. And then turn. And then I continue with the short rows. Usually there are several short rows together, and you'll be going back and forth a few times, maybe increasing or decreasing the number of stitches with each turn. Or sometimes they're stacked where you're wrapping the same stitch more than once. But you continue this way. This is after working just a few short rows and then ending up knitting to the end of the row. And you can see already, just with a few little short rows, now there's this 3-dimensional curve to the knitting. Cool, huh? So that's the flat short row. Working short rows in a circular piece works exactly the same way. I just wanted to show it for reference. I've got 16 stitches cast on here. That doesn't divide evenly onto 3 needles, so I usually don't bother trying to figure out how many stitches on each needle, but I just divided them up this way. I'm going to knit 12 and then do my short rows. If you're familiar with sock knitting, you may have seen short rows worked on, put all the stitches on one needle that you're going to be doing the short rows on, and that's really handy and makes a lot of sense and helps you keep track of them. I don't usually try to do that just because sometimes I'm doing the short rows around most of the piece. So that just wouldn't really work to put most of the stitches on one needle and just have a couple over here. I mean, it could, but it's a little awkward. So this is 12 that I've knit. This is my end of my rounds here because my tail's over here. So I'm going to wrap and turn this next stitch here. It works just the same. Yarn comes in front, slip the next stitch, yarn goes in back, slip it back over. And then the trickiest part is just kind of holding all those needles together and turning them all around. And you see now I'm looking at the inside of my piece instead of just the wrong side. But you see all the purl stitches. I'm going to bring this needle here, just flip it over this one so it's a little less awkward. But it's still the same 2 needles I've been working with. I'm going to do purl 8 here. So again, it's symmetrical. I've got 4 stitches left before the beginning of the round. I'll wrap and turn the next stitch. Yarn goes from front to back. Slip the stitch over, back to front, and slip it back. And then just hold all the needles together and turn them around. And continue going in this direction on the knit side. One other thing to know about wrap and turn short rows is that you can pick up the wraps. I showed that bump earlier, and I'll come back around to the one that I have over here. You can see the little loop on this stitch here. I usually don't pick up my wraps because I just don't mind the way that they look, but you can certainly pick them up. It helps, it kind of helps tighten up the gap that you may have there, and it makes it pretty invisible. So you take your right needle and just put it right under the loop through the bottom, and then also through the stitch it's connected to knit, and then knit the 2 together. You might have to kind of pinch this hard and really pull it to make sure you get it through both of those loops. But then you see the loop disappears, or the bump disappears, and it looks quite smooth. And you can do the same thing on the stitch that was wrapped on the purl side. I'm just gonna come back around to it. One of the reasons that I don't always bother with picking out my stitches is that with my toy patterns, I have lots of increases and decreases. So I may have you do some wrap and turns and then do a knit 2 together with these stitches, or a knit front back. And that's just kind of tricky to do, to try to be also picking up an extra loop with that. So that's the reason I don't bother with it too much, but there's certainly, it's a good thing to do if you can, if you want to, when you come to them again. And that's really it for wrap and turn short rows. Those bumps can help you keep track of where you are in the short rows. I think that's the most challenging thing, is just remembering where you are and trying to keep track of it. But with practice, you'll get it. So here's a couple more examples. Tiny alpaca, I use short rows here to bend the neck up, and then I use them back here. This is across the beginning of the rounds to point the face forward. And on this snitten, a snail cat, I use them just to help the curve of the shell. I also twist it, spiral it together and stitch it, but it helps have a nice curve because of wrap and turn short rows. So they're super handy. I hope you give them a try, and I hope this was helpful. Bye.